Meanwhile, the media is writing the GOP off as President Trump and Republicans are looking to hit this reset button here. Just going and rifling through some of these headlines and items. I don't care the publication. The basic gist is the grand old party is in grand old trouble. To the Wall Street Journal's U.S. editor Glenn Hall, the Weekly Standard deputy managing editor Kelly Jane Torrance, and former Trump New York campaign co-chair Joe Borelli. Joe, ended with you on that the media and the pressure is such that they've given up on Donald Trump.
I don't think they've given up on Donald Trump. I don't think the public has given up on Donald Trump. I mean, when you look to last week in Youngstown, Ohio, he's still getting the kind of enthusiastic crowd supporting him and broadly his agenda. Did we need some sort of a reset button at the White House? Yes, and I think you saw that this week with the staff shakeup. But I think that is more a message that Trump is not going away, he's not giving up. In fact, the White House has even pushed back on the message that they were giving up on health care. Now we're still going forward with that.
All right. I don't know how that's going to finish out, by the way, but we'll see. You know, Glenn, we should look back at history that Ronald Reagan, they thought, was a sure one-termer when it was the depths of the, the recession in '82. They were wrong on that, Republicans could never come back in the early '90s after Bill Clinton. Of course, the Gingrich Revolution, they were wrong on that. So they've been wrong a lot, but the consensus builds that it's an uphill battle. What are you hearing?
Well, there's still a long way to go to 2018, but we're already talking about it, right?
Right.
And I think the deal is, are the Republicans going to be able to demonstrate before then that they, in having all levers of power, are going to be able to get things done? And I think that's what's critical. They have been gaining ground for many years. Typically, though, in the midterm of a first-term president, you start to lose ground.
Right.
And that's the risk that they face. But
especially if it's enough to lose one or both houses.
They've only got a slim majority in the Senate.
Right. Very, very slim. Kelly Jane, what do you think?
Yeah, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and hopefully that means that Republicans can come up with something, because they need some legislative victories. Heck, even just one legislative victory going into the 2018 midterms.
So why do they revisit the health care well?
Well, this is where I see some interesting tension between the White House and Congress.
Right.
I think that Congress wants to take a little break and try to move on, since that was such an epic failure. But now you have President Trump backed up by Steve Mnuchin saying, no, you need to go back to health care before you pass another bill.
That's the irony, right,
like
Joe? Because it started out with the president, we're told, wasn't keen on starting with health care, wanted to go to either infrastructure or tax cuts. Now he's the one, and I think she's right, because I've heard the same, that he's the one pushing health care, let's do this right, because he doesn't want to concede.
Well, tax reform is this huge, gargantuan blimp of a thing. And I think even Chuck Schumer was, I hate to say this as a Republican, but I think Chuck Schumer was right. When you're doing tax reform, you're going to have some winners and losers. And in order to give yourself enough leeway to have less losers and get more of the public on your side, more of the public to get the benefit, you need to relieve some of this pressure from the Obamacare mandates and the cost of that program.
It's going to be tougher. Do it.
If they don't do health care first, it's going to be tougher to do tax reform.
I understand. Logic dictates that's true, but they're not acting logically, and they're not able to vote logically.
I come back to, I see three parties within the Republican Party, right? You've got the conservatives who want one thing, you've got the moderates who want another, and then you've got the Trump Party, right, where he's got a whole different agenda out there, and he's not bringing them all together yet. So
is it on him or those parties, or is it the establishment guys? Because
somebody's got to do it.
He's nixing those establishment guys he inherited. I would include Sean Spicer and Reince Priebus.
But I would say, there's also the Senate versus the House in all of this.
Absolutely.
Ryan versus McConnell. So who's going to be able to bridge that gap? That's the role of the president.
And Kelly Jane, you realize that it's one thing having a majority, it's another having a bare majority. And I think one thing that helped Barack Obama with the health care push is he could afford to lose 39 congressmen, as he did Democratic congressmen on the first health care vote, because he had such a cushion there. And because he had almost 60 senators, he could afford to lose a few of them in the first go-round. There's very little wiggle room here. So what does the president do? He's obviously angry at the inability of a party that has 7 years to get its act together on this, not getting its act together in the city. He's not getting up.
You know, I think that there's a lot of blame to go around here, and that's the thing. You can't solve a problem until you recognize that there is a problem and take responsibility for your own part.
I think they all know there's a problem. They just don't know how to get out of it, right?
Well, that's the thing. So the president's blaming congressional Republicans, especially the Senate. Senators and other congressional Republicans are blaming the president for not, speaking out, using the bully pulpit enough to pump their ideas. I think everyone is to blame here, and people need to look in the mirror and say, what was my part in this, and how can we move forward? But instead, it's sort of easier for them to just say, well, it's someone else's fault. And if they're going to do that, they're not going to change. And obviously, everyone needs to change if any bill to repeal Obamacare is ever going to get passed.
If I could jump in there,
Sure.
Neil, I would say that may be what we're seeing in the change with the Chief of Staff. Right? This is one of those roles that should be helping the president achieve his mission and bringing those coalitions together. He wasn't getting what he wanted, and I think he's going to start over here.
But that really, and I know I sound like a broken record with this, that depends on the president listening to John Kelly. He's got to have the frankness of a relation. You don't have to do everything your chief of staff says. I'm sure there are many times where President Bush ignored Andy Card or
Sure.
Ronald Reagan, James Baker, or what have you. But more than not, you hear their counsel and you weigh what they're saying. I can't imagine a General Kelly would have allowed himself to recommend the president push the size of his crowds at his inauguration in the first press conference, right? So I'm wondering if the president will listen to him.
I think it is. And I think the role of Chief of Staff is not to be a yes man, and that's probably why General Kelly opted to take this job. I think Trump sees him as someone...
He didn't want this job.
But I think Trump sees him as someone who did a great job at DHS. He gave him a mandate, moved some progress on the wall, and lower illegal border crossings. And he was almost clinical in executing those.
Oh, he was a rock star. But is that a guy who's going to do the president's bidding? Or I can see him, I don't know what you guys think, I could actually see him quitting if he's forced on something silly.
I think this is a job that, with this presidency, it's about managing down more than managing up. And I think if he gets that right, he might be able to help affect change that the president wants to get done.
He's got to control everyone who gets into that Oval Office, and they've got to respect that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the gatekeeper is really the job of Chief of Staff. And that's where he will run into problems because this president, for I think, good reason, likes to get a lot of opinions from a lot of
And you know what's encouraging, Kelly, Jenny, think about it. The president, if he were such a freewheeling, inattentive and disinterested in hearing other points of view, he wouldn't probably have made the general his chief of staff to begin with. So he's open to that. The question is, it's sort of like someone who commits to a diet. Then you got to start the diet, right?
Exactly, and that's the thing. I mean, it's a good first step, but I feel like the last week has indicated that he might not be there yet. He might not be ready to start on that diet. I mean, you have him hiring Anthony Scaramucci, going out, having a vulgar rant against Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon.
You
and
call
Steve
it
Bannon
vulgar.
still in the White
Italian
House.
Americans call it colorful.
That's my family dinner.
Well, but I mean, and what, was he punished for this rant? No, he was rewarded. He got Reince Priebus out of there.
So you think you're getting mixed messages there?
I think so. I mean, the president seems to be encouraging that kind of craziness and disorder that General Kelly supposedly brought in to
You should hear what Glenn
get
Hall
rid of.
says when no one's around. But it is true. It's two different vibes we're getting here.
Look, I think the way I would characterize this, if you look back to the campaign and you saw that there were times when they were trying to get Trump to behave in a certain way more like a candidate, and he didn't feel it was working, he went back to being Trump. And I think what you're seeing right now is Trump surrounding himself with people that will let Trump be Trump.
Right. You had Reince as a handler.
Yeah.
You had Sean Spicer trying to convert the things Trump said into what they imagined the American public wanted to hear. That's not who the American public elected.
No doubt, but he's shrewd enough to know, yes, I got here doing it by following my gut, but now as president you have to pivot to do things a little differently to get stuff done, right?
You know, what's interesting to me is that, we don't know that much about how John Kelly is going to do the job, but I feel like one of the biggest hints is, you remember there was that ceremony at the Coast Guard, and, they handed Trump the ceremonial sword, and Secretary Kelly said, hey, you can use that on the press. And that kind of indicates to me that he is sort of encouraging Trump in his sort of war against the media.
Yeah, low-key, Irish Catholic way. So we'll see how that goes. Guys, I want to thank you all very, very much.